Silence swallowed the birthing chamber so completely that even the ritual candles seemed afraid to crackle. 3 physicians, each one wearing the silver crest of the royal blood court, stood over a cradle carved from black stone. Their hands were steady. Their faces were carefully blank. But their eyes refused to meet the gaze of the man standing beside the cradle. Because Vampire King Valar Nightborn, the ruler whose name made armies kneel, was not looking at them. He was looking at the tiny bundle wrapped in crimson cloth. And he wasn't breathing. "Your Majesty," one of the physicians finally said, voice thin with practiced certainty, "the infant has." "Don't." Valar's voice came out low. Not a command. Not a threat. A warning he didn't mean to give. The physician swallowed. "The infant has no heartbeat. No breath. No response to blood resonance. We have verified it." The words landed like stones. For a moment, the room waited for the king to explode, because that's what everyone expected when Valar Nightborn was denied something he wanted. But he didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't destroy the chamber. He simply stared down at his newborn son, his pale fingers hovering over the child's chest as if his touch alone could force life back into it. Valar Nightborn had ended rebellions with a glance. He had sentenced traitors with a nod. He had stood in halls drenched with battle and never once flinched. Yet now his hands trembled. The physicians exchanged quick looks of relief. Relief that the king was silent, relief that their authority still held in the face of grief. And that was when the door opened. Not with the grand announcement of a noble. Not with the respectful knock of a servant. It opened the way doors opened for people who were not supposed to matter, quietly, cautiously, almost apologetically. A young woman stepped inside. She wore plain work clothes, dark fabric patched at the elbows, dust on the hem. Her hair was tied back too tightly, as if she had learned long ago that loose strands invited punishment. Her hands were rough, the hands of someone who scrubbed floors that others walked on without looking down. She should not have been in that room. Not in the birthing chamber of the vampire royal line. A guard took one step forward. "You." But before he could finish, the girl's eyes lifted to the cradle, and something in her face changed. Not fear. Not awe. Recognition. Like she could see what the others refused to look for. "Please," she said softly. He's not gone." The physicians turned as one, offended. Dr. Morkant, tall, severe, and cruel in the way powerful people often became, snapped, "Who let a servant in here?" The girl flinched, but she held her ground. "I was cleaning the corridor. I heard what you said." "You heard nothing you were meant to hear," Dr. Morkant hissed. "Leave." Valar still didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the baby. The girl took a shaky breath. "Your Majesty, I can help." That finally made the king look up. His eyes, silver like winter moons, landed on her, and the entire room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every servant in the castle had been warned about those eyes. They weren't just the eyes of a vampire. They were the eyes of a ruler who had lived too long, lost too much, and decided mercy was an indulgence for weaker men. The girl's throat bobbed. Her knees wanted to give out. But she didn't step back. "I can bring him back," she whispered. One of the physicians laughed, sharp, ugly. "A floor girl thinks she can undo what the blood court could not?" The guard reached for her arm. "Out. Now." But then, in a voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air, Valar spoke. "Let her finish." The guard froze, hand mid-reach. The physician stiffened, offended all over again. "Your Majesty, this is reckless. This is." Valar's gaze cut through them. "My son is dead, you say?" They hesitated. "Then," Valar continued, voice calm in the most terrifying way, "what harm is there in allowing a girl to be foolish for 1 minute?" The physicians fell silent because there was only one answer. None. The girl swallowed hard. "Thank you," she said. And then she stepped closer to the cradle. Her name, though no one bothered to ask, was Elara Vale. And she had spent her whole life being told she was nothing. Elara had been born in the lower quarters of Nightborn City, where sunlight barely touched the alleyways and human families lived stacked in cramped rooms under the shadow of immortal towers. Humans weren't slaves, at least not officially. But in Nightborn City, the difference between servant and slave was often just a nicer word spoken by someone in silk. Elara's mother had once worked in the royal laundries, hands raw from washing blood-stained ceremonial garments. Her father had been a bookbinder, until the day vampire officials confiscated his shop because he couldn't pay a tax that seemed to change every week. Then her father disappeared. No trial. No explanation. Just gone. Ilara was 12 when she learned the first rule of surviving under vampire rule. If you cry too loudly, someone will punish you for making noise. So she learned to cry silently. She learned to keep her head down. She learned to work twice as hard for half as much. And when her mother fell sick, lungs weak from chemical fumes used in royal cleaning solutions, Ilara learned the second rule. No one saves the poor unless saving them benefits the powerful. So Ilara tried to save her mother herself. She begged healers. They laughed. She asked priests. They preached patience. She went to the blood court clinic on her knees once, offering everything she owned, 2 coins and a scarf. The clerk barely looked up. Humans are not eligible for royal blood medicine. Ilara carried her mother home, shaking with anger she could not afford to show. That was the night she found the hidden book. It wasn't magic at first glance, just old paper bound in cracked leather, shoved behind a loose stone in the wall of their room. Her father must have hidden it. On the cover, in faded script, were words Ilara couldn't read. But when she opened it, she saw diagrams of hearts and veins, human hearts, vampire hearts, and something in between. Hybrid. Half of the pages were written in a language no human school taught. The other half were written in rough, desperate notes, like someone had been learning in secret. Ilara's hands shook as she traced the drawings. And when her mother coughed blood into a rag that night, Ilara didn't scream. She opened the book. She started learning. Not because she believed she could win, but because she refused to do nothing. Years passed, and Ilara became what the castle called a cleaner. It was a polite title for someone who scrubbed the places nobles never wanted to think about. The birthing chambers after delivery, the ritual rooms after blood ceremonies, the corridors after tantrums from immortal princes who enjoyed breaking things just to remind servants they could. Ilara was invisible. And invisibility was a strange kind of safety. Until the night she heard the physicians. Until she heard the word dead spoken about a newborn child. And something inside her, something older than fear, stood up and said, "Not again." Because Ilara knew what the physicians didn't. Or rather, she knew what they refused to believe. There was a condition mentioned in her father's book, rare, misunderstood, and dismissed by the blood court as human superstition. It was called crimson stillness. A state where the newborn's body, especially a newborn touched by mixed blood, could slow itself so completely that traditional tests read as death. The heart beat so softly it became a whisper. Breath faded into almost nothing. The body looked cold, lifeless. But it wasn't death. It was protection. It was the body hiding from danger, waiting for safety before waking. Ilara had read it over and over, memorizing every note, every diagram, every warning. And one warning had been underlined 3 times. If the stillness is not broken with warmth and resonance, the child may never return. Ilara stepped beside the cradle and looked down at the baby's face. He was beautiful in the way newborns were, small, fragile, and unaware of the power his bloodline carried. His skin was pale, almost luminous. But there was a faint bluish tint at his lips that made Ilara's stomach knot. The physicians were right about one thing. If this was crimson stillness, it had gone too far. Time was running out. Ilara closed her eyes. Then she reached into the pocket of her work apron and pulled out something that made Dr. Morcant gasp. A small, worn notebook. The pages were stained with years of use, covered in handwriting so tight it looked like the words were clinging to life. "You dare bring filth into a royal birthing chamber?" Dr. Morcant snapped. "It's not filth," Ilara said, voice shaking. "It's knowledge." Dr. Morcant sneered. "From where? A gutter priest?" Ilara didn't answer. Because the truth would get her killed. The truth was that her father had once worked for a vampire scholar, binding books for the court archives. And one night he had bound the wrong book. A forbidden text. A text that spoke of hybrid heirs and prophecies and cures the court didn't want anyone to know existed. When vampire officials discovered the book was missing, they didn't just punish the scholar. They erased everyone connected to the mistake. Ilara's father vanished. Her mother became sick after being forced into harsher labor as penance. And Ilara survived because no one thought a thin human girl mattered. Now, standing beside the king's dead, or dying, son, Ilara felt a strange twist of fate tightening around her ribs. Because the man watching her, vampire King Valor Nightborn, was rumored to be the one who signed the order for that purge. Ilara didn't know if it was true. But she knew one thing. If she saved this baby, she might be saving the child of the man who destroyed her life. Her heart hammered. Her hands shook. But her gaze stayed on the infant. Because whatever Valor Nightborn had done, this child hadn't done anything. And Ilara had made a promise to herself long ago. Innocence should never pay for power's sins. She looked up at the king, swallowing fear like bitter medicine. Your Majesty, she said carefully, they're measuring the wrong signs. Dr. Morkan scoffed. The audacity. Ilara, she blurted before she could stop herself. Then she steadied. My name is Ilara, and I know this condition. I've studied it. Dr. Morkan's face turned ugly. A servant does not speak her name in the presence of the king unless invited. Valer's gaze never left Ilara. Continue, he said. The room stiffened. Ilara's throat tightened. She forced the words out. Sometimes, newborns with mixed blood can enter a state called crimson stillness, she said. It looks like death, but it isn't. It's the body protecting itself. Dr. Morkan laughed again, louder. My king, this is nonsense. Ilara's cheeks burned, but she pressed on. If I'm right, warmth and resonance can break it. If I'm wrong, her voice cracked. Then nothing changes. Dr. Morkan stepped forward, eyes sharp. And what will you use? Your dirty hands? Your human breath? Ilara's fingers curled around her notebook. My blood. That made the other physicians jerk back like she'd cursed. Human blood was considered inferior, weak, almost insulting. But Ilara had read the truth. Mixed-blood infants sometimes responded better to human resonance than vampire resonance. Because the human half of their biology recognized it as safety. Ilara reached for a clean cloth, one of the sterilized linens abandoned by the physicians. She wrapped it around her hand, then pulled a small silver needle from her apron. A cleaning needle, used to remove splinters from servants' fingers. Sharp enough to pierce skin. She hesitated, feeling the king's stare. Then she pressed the needle into her finger. A bead of blood welled up. Tiny. Ordinary. Yet the room reacted as if she'd spilled poison. Stop. Dr. Morkan barked. You will contaminate the royal air. Valer's voice cut through the air like a blade. You will be silent. Dr. Morkan froze, mouth open. Ilara leaned over the baby and dabbed the smallest amount of blood onto the infant's lips. Nothing happened. Her stomach dropped. She forced herself not to panic. Crimson stillness didn't break with one touch. It required rhythm, resonance, warmth. Ilara placed her palm gently over the baby's chest and closed her eyes. She began to hum, not a song of the court, not a ritual chant. A simple lullaby. A human lullaby her mother used to sing when the world was cruel. Ilara's voice trembled at first, then steadied as she focused on the rhythm in her own chest. She imagined her heartbeat reaching the baby's heart like a rope thrown across dark water. Come back, she pleaded silently. Come back, little one. The air in the chamber felt thick. The candles flickered. And then, Ilara felt it. A faint, almost imperceptible flutter beneath her palm. So soft she thought she imagined it. Her breath caught. She pressed her ear closer, listening with everything she had. One beat. Then nothing. Then another. Like a door cracking open. Ilara's eyes flew open, shining with tears. She whispered. He's trying. Dr. Morkan's face turned rigid with disbelief. Impossible. Ilara didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she lost focus now, the door might close again. She shifted tactics the way her notes instructed. Warmth, shock. Gently, carefully, she lifted the baby and wrapped him against her chest, skin to skin through the thin cloth. The physicians gasped in outrage. A human touching the royal air. Valer didn't stop her. He watched, utterly still, as if the entire world had narrowed down to this one fragile moment. Ilara whispered to the baby, voice shaking. You're safe, she murmured, even though she didn't know if it was true. You're safe. Come back. The infant's lips trembled. A tiny sound, so small it might have been imagined, escaped his throat. A first breath. Not strong. Not loud. But real. Ilara froze. The room froze. Valer Nightborn's eyes widened, just slightly, just enough to show the crack in his cold armor. Then the baby let out a thin, weak cry. It was the softest sound. But it shattered the silence like thunder. For half a second no one moved. Then one of the physicians rushed forward, frantic. Your Majesty, I must examine. Valer lifted one hand. The physician stopped as if an invisible wall had slammed into him. The king stepped closer, slowly, as though he feared sudden movement might break whatever miracle had just happened. Ilara looked up at him, still holding the crying infant against her chest. Valer stared at his son, and something terrifyingly human flickered across his face. Relief. Then something darker. Because the king was not a fool. He understood power. And he understood what it meant when a nobody did what the mighty could not. His gaze lifted from the baby to Alara's face. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low. Alara's throat tightened. Because that question was not curiosity. It was danger. If Valor decided she was a threat, she would disappear before sunrise. And yet, his son was breathing because of her. She forced herself to answer carefully. "I'm a cleaner, Your Majesty," she said. "I work the night corridors." Valor's eyes narrowed, sharp as winter. A cleaner does not know crimson stillness. Alara's heart pounded. She felt every eye in the chamber on her, especially Dr. Morkant's, hungry, hateful, already calculating how to punish her for making him look incompetent. Alara chose her words like stepping across broken glass. "I learned," she said softly, "because people like me don't get saved unless we learn to save ourselves." Something in Valor's expression shifted. Not softness. Not yet. But interest. And in the shadows of that room, destiny leaned closer. Because Alara Vale had just done the impossible. She had brought the Vampire King's son back from the edge of death. And now the most feared immortal ruler alive was looking at her like she was no longer invisible. Like she was no longer a servant. Like she was a piece on the board, and perhaps something more. Alara held the baby tighter, trying not to shake. Because she suddenly realized, saving the child was only the beginning. The real danger would be what came next. When the court demanded answers. When jealous physicians demanded punishment. When the king demanded truth. And when Alara discovered whether Valor Nightborn was truly the monster rumored in human quarters. Or whether grief had carved a space in his immortal heart that only she could reach. And deep inside Alara's chest, under fear and exhaustion, an impossible thought whispered. If he can love his child like this, maybe he can learn mercy. But mercy, Alara knew, always had a price. And she had a terrible feeling she was about to pay it. The baby's cries still echoed in the birthing chamber when the first person moved against the miracle. Dr. Morkant. His face had gone pale, not from fear for the child, but from the humiliation of being proven wrong in front of the king. Pride was a disease in the immortal realm, and Dr. Morkant had been infected for centuries. He stepped forward, voice sharp enough to cut stone. "Your Majesty, this is unacceptable. A human servant has contaminated the royal heir. There are protocols, laws, blood purity rites." Alara's arms tightened around the infant on instinct. The child, warm now and breathing in fragile little pulls, made a tiny whimper as if sensing the tension. Valor didn't look at Morkant. He looked at his son. Then, slowly, his gaze moved to Alara. "Give him to me," he said. Alara hesitated. Not because she didn't want to. Because the baby had calmed against her chest, and she feared that breaking that warmth bridge too quickly might send him back into that terrifying stillness. She swallowed, voice barely audible. "Your Majesty, he needs the warmth for a moment longer. His body is still fragile." Morkant's eyes widened like she'd slapped the king. "She dares instruct you." Valor lifted his hand. The chamber fell silent so fast it felt like the air itself froze. Valor's eyes stayed on Alara. "You speak as if you know what you're doing." Alara's throat tightened. I do. A little." Valor's gaze sharpened, and she could feel him weighing her, measuring whether she was courage or foolishness, truth or manipulation. Then his voice dropped to something only the front line of the room could hear. "Then you will tell me exactly what you did. And you will tell me now." Alara's heartbeat stumbled. The king wasn't asking. But she nodded anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty." Valor stepped closer, and Alara carefully shifted the infant, supporting his head the way she'd learned in servant quarters when mothers had no help and no time to be clumsy. She placed the baby into Valor's arms. The king held him like he held a crown, carefully, reverently, like something that could be stolen by fate at any second. He pressed the infant close, and the child's tiny fingers curled against Valor's cloak. A sound, almost like a broken breath, escaped Valor's chest. It wasn't a sob. Vampire kings didn't sob. But it was the closest thing to vulnerability Alara had ever seen in an immortal. And Morkant saw it too. Which was why he lunged for control. "Your Majesty," Morkant insisted, "the blood court must quarantine the child. He has been exposed to human blood resonance. We must perform cleansing rites." "Eliminate her," Dr. Wex added coldly, as if saying it was as casual as sweeping dust. "Before she spreads her superstition." Alara's stomach dropped. She had known this would happen. She had known the moment she stepped forward, the court would come for her. The miracle didn't protect her. It painted a target on her back. Morkant's gaze slid over Alara with open disgust. "You've committed treason by touching the royal heir without permission. The punishment is..." Vaylor's voice interrupted him. One word. Enough. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room snapped into obedience like puppets pulled by strings. Morkan's mouth closed, but his eyes remained poisonous. Vaylor turned slightly, still holding his son. His gaze swept the physicians, the guards, the midwives, every immortal who believed hierarchy was more important than life. If my son had died, Vaylor said quietly, your protocols would have saved nothing. Morkan stiffened. Your Majesty, we. Vaylor's eyes flicked to him. You declared him dead. Silence. You wanted to preserve his body in ice. To announce a tragedy. To perform ritual grief. Vaylor's voice sharpened, the calm turning into something colder. And yet a human cleaner, someone you deemed beneath your notice, saw what you refused to see and brought him back. Ilara's chest hurt with the weight of everyone's stare. Vaylor continued, each word a blade against the court's pride. So here is the new protocol. Morkan's throat worked. Your Majesty? Vaylor lifted his chin. Ilara Vale stays alive. Ilara's breath caught. How did he know her full name? But Vaylor didn't stop. She will be protected under royal decree. The room jolted like it had been struck. A guard stammered, Your Majesty. Vaylor's gaze turned sharp. Anyone who harms her harms me. The words fell like a guillotine. For the first time Morkan looked afraid. Ilara's knees nearly gave out. Because protection from the Vampire King was not gentle. It wasn't a warm blanket. It was a chain. A mark. A spotlight. And any spotlight in the vampire court burned. 2 hours later, Ilara stood in a stone corridor outside the royal nursery, her hands still trembling. She had been scrubbed clean by midwives who looked at her like she was contagious. She had been forced into a plain gray dress instead of her work clothes. Not out of kindness, out of control. Every step she took now had guards behind her. Not escort. Guard. Ilara knew what that meant. The court didn't believe Vaylor's decree made her valuable. They believed it made her dangerous. A door opened behind her. A tall figure stepped into the corridor. Lord Riven Ashmore. Vaylor's royal advisor. An ancient vampire whose eyes had seen empires collapse and never blinked. His hair was silver black, his posture perfectly calm, and his expression carried the quiet cruelty of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to destroy you. He looked at Ilara as if she were a puzzle he didn't trust. You saved the heir, he said. Ilara swallowed. I helped. Riven stepped closer. Do not pretend modesty buys you mercy in this court. Ilara's fingers curled into her skirt. I'm not pretending. I'm trying not to die. Riven's mouth twitched, not a smile but almost. At least you understand reality. He tilted his head slightly. Where did you learn about crimson stillness? Ilara's pulse spiked. She should lie. She should say she guessed. But the king had already seen through her once. And Riven's eyes were sharper than any blade. I found notes, she admitted carefully. Old medical notes. Riven's gaze narrowed. Forbidden notes. Ilara didn't answer. Riven studied her for a long moment, then spoke with quiet warning. The physicians you embarrassed today are powerful. Their pride will not heal quickly. They will look for a reason to accuse you of tampering with the heir. Ilara's voice trembled. But the king protected me. Riven's eyes hardened. The king protected you because he is grieving and furious. His protection is absolute, until it isn't. Ilara felt cold spread through her veins. Riven leaned closer, voice lower. If you are hiding anything, if your knowledge comes from banned sources, if you have any connection to the old prophecy bloodlines. Ilara's breath caught. Riven watched her reaction like a predator. You don't know what I'm talking about, he concluded softly. Ilara forced herself to shake her head. No, my lord. Riven didn't look convinced. But he stepped back. Good, he said. Because if you were connected to those bloodlines, the king would be forced to choose between his son and his throne. Ilara's stomach turned. Then Riven delivered the final blow, as casually as an executioner sharpening his blade. You will come to the king tonight. He wants answers. And he does not enjoy being deceived. That night, Ilara was brought to Vaylor's private study. The room was enormous, walls lined with books older than human history, candles burning in crimson glass, a fireplace that gave no warmth because vampires didn't need it. Vaylor stood by the window, back turned, looking out over the city. His son was alive. But the palace felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see who would be punished for almost losing him. Ilara stopped at the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to step in. Vaylor spoke without turning. Close the door. The guard shut it. Elara was alone with the Vampire King. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Valor turned. In the candlelight he looked even more terrifying than in the birthing chamber. Tall, perfectly still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong to humans. His eyes were silver, but there was something raw in them now, like grief had scraped the ancient armor off his soul. "You saved him," Valor said. Elara's throat tightened. "He saved himself. I just helped him come back." Valor's gaze flicked over her, assessing. "You were not afraid." Elara almost laughed at the absurdity. "I was terrified." Valor's mouth barely moved. "Yet you stepped forward anyway." Elara's fingers twisted together. "I've seen what happens when people do nothing." For a moment, Valor didn't speak. Then he moved toward his desk, where an object sat wrapped in cloth. He pulled the cloth away. A small, delicate silver cradle bell. Elara's eyes widened. It was a royal heirloom. Valor touched it with 2 fingers like it was sacred. "My consort died giving birth," he said, voice flat. Elara's chest tightened. Sorry?" Valor's eyes sharpened. "Do not pity me." Elara swallowed. "Then why tell me?" Valor leaned forward slightly. "Because you are the only one in this castle who has touched my son and did not treat him like a symbol." Elara froze. Valor's gaze pinned her. "Tell me how you knew." Elara hesitated, every instinct screaming to lie. But something in his expression warned her. If she lied, he would know. She took a shaky breath. "There's a condition," she said quietly. Crimson stillness. "It happens sometimes in mixed-blood infants." Valor's eyes narrowed. Mixed blood. Elara regretted saying it immediately. The court hated those words. Valor's voice dropped. "Explain." Elara forced herself to keep going. The body slows down to hide. Heartbeat becomes almost nothing. Breath becomes almost nothing. The child looks dead but isn't, Valor finished, voice like steel. Elara nodded. "Yes." Valor stared at her for a long moment, then asked the question that made Elara's blood go cold. "And why would my son, my pure-blood heir, have symptoms of a mixed-blood infant?" Elara's mouth went dry. Because she had noticed things. Tiny things. The infant's skin carried a faint warmth that vampires didn't have. His pulse responded to human resonance faster than vampire blood magic. His cry sounded softer, less sharp. Things no court physician would ever admit. Elara felt trapped. Valor watched her face and his voice became dangerously quiet. "You know something," he said. Elara's hands trembled. I don't know," she whispered. "I only know what I saw. And what I read." Valor's eyes flashed. "What you read?" Elara's pulse spiked. He stepped closer and the air seemed to tighten around her. "Where did you get those texts?" he asked. Elara swallowed hard. "I found them." Valor's gaze was merciless. "Found them where?" Elara's voice shook. "In my home. Hidden." Valor's eyes narrowed further. "By whom?" Elara's lungs felt too small. "By my father." The room went very still. Valor's expression shifted, not to kindness but to recognition, as if a memory had just surfaced. "Your father?" Valor repeated. "What was his name?" Elara hesitated. Then she said it. "Alden Vale." The moment the name left her mouth, Valor's entire body locked. Not like anger. Like shock. Like a man struck by a ghost. Elara's stomach turned. You knew him?" Valor didn't answer right away. He turned away, jaw tight, staring into the fireplace that offered no warmth. And when he finally spoke, his voice was barely controlled. "Alden Vale was executed under my decree," he said. Elara felt the world tilt. Executed. Under his decree. Her knees went weak. She forced herself to stay standing, nails biting into her palms. Valor turned back, eyes sharp. "Why do you carry his knowledge?" Elara's voice came out broken. "Because he was my father." Valor froze. The air seemed to vanish. Elara stared at him, tears burning in her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from fury. All her life, she had lived with an empty chair at the table, with her mother coughing herself into silence, with hunger, with humiliation, with the crushing knowledge that someone powerful had decided her family didn't deserve to exist. And now that someone was standing in front of her. The Vampire King. The same man who had just protected her. The same man whose son she saved. Elara's voice shook, but it hardened like iron. "So tell me, Your Majesty," she whispered. "Did you sign his death sentence with the same hand you used to hold your son tonight?" Valor's eyes flashed, dangerous, wounded. Elara braced for punishment. for death, for the guards to drag her away. But instead, Valor went completely still. And in that stillness, something frightening happened. The Vampire King looked haunted. As if for the first time in centuries he was being forced to face the cost of his own power. Ilara stood trembling, tears on her lashes, watching the immortal ruler who could destroy her with a word. And she realized, saving the baby didn't bind her to the king. It bound her to the king's past. And the court outside that door was already sharpening knives, ready to tear her apart the moment Valor's protection wavered. Because now Ilara wasn't just a poor girl who performed a miracle. She was a living reminder of a purge. A purge Valor Nightborn ordered. And the truth was about to ignite a war inside the palace. The silence between them was heavier than any scream. Valor Nightborn stood unmoving, his expression carved from centuries of command, yet something inside that stillness had cracked. Ilara could see it, she could feel it, like the faint tremor beneath stone before it collapses. Alden Vale, Valor repeated slowly as if the name itself carried weight enough to bend time. Ilara's chest burned. You remember him, she said. It wasn't a question. Valor turned away again, his back rigid. I remember a scholar who defied blood law. Ilara's jaw tightened. He was a healer. He was a traitor, Valor said flatly. The word struck like a slap. Ilara's voice trembled, but it didn't break. He was a father. Valor's fingers curled at his side. For the first time since she'd met him, Ilara saw something flicker across the Vampire King's face that wasn't rage or authority. Conflict. I signed many decrees, Valor said. Names blur together across centuries. Ilara laughed softly, bitterly. Not for us. They don't blur for the ones left behind. Valor turned back to her, eyes sharp. You accuse me. I state a fact, Ilara replied, surprising herself with her steadiness. You ordered his death. And yet, I saved your son with what he taught me. The words hung between them like a blade balanced on a fingertip. Valor looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a servant, not as a miracle worker, but as a consequence. You should hate me, he said quietly. Ilara swallowed. I thought I did. Valor's gaze narrowed. Thought. Ilara's shoulders sagged, exhaustion finally breaking through fear. Hatred is heavy. Carrying it every day, it makes you cruel. And I've seen enough cruelty. Valor studied her, something unreadable shifting behind his eyes. You saved my son knowing who I am, he said. Ilara nodded. Yes. Knowing what I did. Yes. Why? Valor demanded. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment. Images flooded her mind. Her mother's hollow cough, her father's empty chair, the cold nights scrubbing blood from stone floors, the baby's first fragile breath. Because he's innocent, she whispered. And because if I let him die just to punish you, then I become what destroyed my family. The words landed hard. Valor didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, stripped of ceremony. You are dangerous. Ilara's heart clenched. I know. Not because of your knowledge, he continued, but because you refuse to hate. Ilara looked at him. Is that a crime here? Valor's mouth twitched, almost a smile but not quite. In my court? Often. A knock thundered at the door. Before Ilara could react, Lord Riven Ashmore entered without waiting for permission. His expression was grim. Your Majesty, Riven said, bowing. The Blood Court is convening an emergency tribunal. Valor's eyes hardened. Already? They're calling it a matter of succession security, Riven replied. The physicians are claiming the heir was compromised by human interference. Ilara's blood ran cold. Riven's gaze flicked to her. And there are rumors. Valor didn't look away from Ilara. What rumors? That the girl carries forbidden blood knowledge, Riven said carefully. That her family was tied to the old hybrid prophecies. Ilara's breath hitched. Valor's jaw tightened. And what do you believe? Riven hesitated. I believe the court is afraid. Valor turned toward the door. Then they will learn. The tribunal chamber was a cathedral of power. Black marble floors etched with ancient sigils. High pillars carved with the names of vampire kings long dead. At the center stood the blood court, 7 elders, each one older than most human civilizations. Ilara walked beside Valor, guards flanking her like iron shadows. Every step echoed. Every gaze burned. She felt small. Exposed. But Valor walked calmly, his presence bending the room around him. The elders rose as he entered, not out of respect but necessity. Dr. Morkan stood near the front, his lips curved in something close to triumph. "Your Majesty," Morkant began, voice ringing. "We convene under emergency blood law. The royal heir's condition is stable," Valor cut in. "And alive." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Elder Tirwes, ancient and skeletal, leaned forward. "Alive due to unconventional means." Elara felt every eye turn to her. Morkant seized the moment. This human interfered with royal medicine using forbidden techniques. Her presence alone is a contamination risk. Elara clenched her fists. Valor's voice was ice. "She saved my son." Tirwes's eyes glittered. "At what cost?" Morkant smiled thinly. "We have reason to believe her knowledge originates from Alden Vale." The chamber stilled. Elder Sereth hissed softly. "The executed heretic?" Elara's heart thundered. Morkant pressed on. "If she carries his teachings, she carries his treason. Blood law is clear, such knowledge cannot exist." Valor's gaze swept the elders. "Blood law failed my son." Gasps erupted. Valor raised his chin. "If you wish to punish someone, punish yourselves." The elders bristled. Tirwes's voice sharpened. "You forget yourself, king?" Valor stepped forward. "No. I remember exactly who I am." He turned slightly, placing himself between Elara and the court. A protective gesture. The room noticed. Riven noticed. Morkant's smile faltered. "Elara Vale," Elder Sereth said coldly. "Step forward." Elara's legs trembled, but she obeyed. "Do you deny using forbidden blood resonance?" Sereth demanded. Elara lifted her chin. "No." Gasped. "Do you deny being taught by Alden Vale?" Teacher YSS pressed. "No." Morkant's eyes gleamed. "And do you deny," Tiasis continued, "that your actions could destabilize the purity of the royal line?" Elara swallowed. "I deny that saving a child is a crime." The chamber erupted in whispers. Tirwes slammed his staff. "Silence." Valor's hand tightened at his side. Tirwes leaned forward, eyes cold. "You are accused of treason, heresy, and endangering the succession." Elara's heart pounded. "If you kill me," she said quietly, "you kill the knowledge that saved your heir." Morkant scoffed. "Knowledge can be extracted." Elara looked at him, calm and devastating. "Not from a dead heart." The elders murmured again, uneasy. Valor spoke, his voice ringing with finality. "She will not be harmed." Teacher YSS sneered. "You cannot protect a human against the court." Valor's eyes blazed silver. "Watch me." Power surged through the chamber, the air vibrating with ancient magic. Candles flared. Sigils glowed. The elders stiffened. Valor's voice was thunder wrapped in ice. "Elara Vale is under my protection. She will live in the palace. She will be guarded. And any who move against her will answer to me." A dangerous silence followed. Tirwes leaned back slowly. "You risk civil fracture." Valor didn't blink. "Then fracture it." Elara stared at him, shock flooding her chest. Because this wasn't just protection. This was defiance. Morkant's face twisted. "You would endanger your throne for a human?" Valor glanced back at Elara, just once. And in that glance, she saw something she never expected to see directed at her. "Trust." "She is not just human," Valor said. "She is the reason my son breathes." The elders exchanged dark looks. Tirwes's lips thinned. "Very well. But know this, King Nightborn, prophecy blood always demands payment." Valor's voice dropped. "So does injustice." That night, Elara was given chambers in the inner palace. Not a servant's room. A real room. With silk curtains and warm stone walls and guards outside the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking. Everything had changed. A knock came softly. Valor entered alone. Elara rose quickly. "Your Majesty." "Valor," he said. She froze. "What?" "In private," he said quietly. "You may call me Valor." Her heart stumbled. He stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "You should hate me," he said again. "Perhaps one day you will." Elara met his gaze. "Perhaps. But tonight, I don't." Valor's jaw tightened. "I don't deserve your mercy." Elara's voice was gentle. "Neither did my father. But he gave it anyway." Valor exhaled slowly, centuries of certainty unraveling. "You are not safe here," he admitted. Elara nodded. "I know." "And yet," Valor said, his gaze lingering, "I find that the idea of harm coming to you is unacceptable." Elara's breath caught. The air between them grew thick with something unspoken, something dangerous and tender. Valor straightened, armor slipping back into place. Rest. Tomorrow will be worse. Elara managed a faint smile. I'll survive. Valor paused at the door. You always do. When he left, Elara pressed a hand to her chest, heart racing. Because somewhere between saving his son and facing his past, the Vampire King had begun to change. And the court would not forgive either of them for it. Elara didn't sleep. The bed was soft, the chamber warm, but her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tribunal chamber. 7 ancient vampires staring at her like judges already sharpening the sentence. Prophecy blood always demands payment. Elder Tyrus's words echoed in her skull. She rose quietly and moved to the window. From here, the Nightborn city stretched endlessly, towers and shadows and lights that never truly slept. Somewhere out there, humans were still scrubbing floors, still bowing their heads, still surviving the way she once had. And somewhere inside this palace, someone wanted her dead. A soft knock broke the silence. Elara stiffened. Enter, she said carefully. The door opened and Valor stepped inside. Not armored. Not crowned. Just dressed in dark, simple fabric. Still unmistakably king but stripped of ceremony. You should have guards, Elara said. They're outside, Valor replied. I wanted to speak freely. Her pulse quickened. Is something wrong? Yes, he said simply. Everything. Valor moved closer, stopping near the window beside her. For a moment they stood in silence, looking out at the city. The court will not stop, Valor said quietly. They cannot. Elara swallowed. Because of my father. And because of you, Valor added. Because what you represent terrifies them. Elara frowned. I'm just a girl who cleaned floors. Valor turned to her, eyes intense. You are a reminder that our laws are flawed. That power can be wrong. That immortality does not equal wisdom. Elara looked away. That's not why they're afraid. Valor didn't deny it. No. They are afraid because of my son. Elara's breath caught. Valor's voice lowered. The physicians examined him again tonight. Quietly. Without court witnesses. Elara turned sharply. And? Valor hesitated. They found markers, he said. Human-compatible resonance. Not dominance. Compatibility. Elara's heart pounded. That means? It means, Valor interrupted, that my son carries more than pure vampire blood. Elara closed her eyes. This was it. The truth she had sensed but never dared to say aloud. Valor's jaw tightened. The court believes hybrids weaken our rule. That they blur lines meant to stay sharp. Elara looked at him. Do you believe that? Valor met her gaze. No. The word was firm. Certain. And dangerous. I believe, he continued, that my son lived because of what they fear. Elara's throat tightened. Then they'll try to erase it. Erase him. Valor's expression darkened. They will try. Elara turned to face him fully. Then you must protect him. Even from them. Valor's eyes softened, not with weakness but with something deeper. I intend to. He paused, then said the words Elara hadn't expected. I need your help. Her breath hitched. With what? With understanding him, Valor replied. With teaching him what the court refuses to acknowledge. With keeping him alive. Elara stared at him. They'll never allow that. Valor's mouth curved in something almost like a smile. They don't have to. A sudden chill ran through Elara. What are you planning? Valor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thin, ancient scroll sealed with black wax. Elara's eyes widened. That seal. Royal blood law, Valor said. The oldest one. He broke the seal. The air shifted as if the palace itself leaned in. This law predates the court, Valor said. It allows the king to name a blood-bound guardian to the royal heir. Elara's heart began to race. A guardian chosen not by blood, but by life debt. Her hands trembled. You can't mean. I do, Valor said softly. Elara shook her head. They'll call it treason. They already are, Valor replied. This simply makes it official. Elara stepped back. I'm human. I don't belong in this world. Valor's gaze never left hers. You belong where my son's heart beat when it almost stopped. The words hit her harder than any accusation. I don't want power, Elara whispered. I don't want revenge. Valor's voice dropped. I want redemption. Their eyes locked. A dangerous understanding passed between them. Before Elara could respond, the palace alarm sounded. Oh, ancient. Valor stiffened. They're moving. Who? Elara asked. The court, he replied. And they are not here to debate. The attack came at dawn. Not open war. Assassins. Silent, cloaked figures slipping through shadowed corridors, blood court enforcers trained to erase mistakes. Elara woke to glass shattering. A blade grazed her shoulder as she rolled from the bed, pain searing. Guards clashed outside her door, steel ringing against ancient weapons. Elara. Vaylor's voice thundered through the chaos. She ran. Barefoot, heart hammering, Elara fled into the corridor just as a masked enforcer lunged at her. Before she could scream, the vampire froze midair, his body locked, eyes wide. Vaylor stood behind him, eyes blazing silver. The enforcer disintegrated into ash. Vaylor grabbed Elara's wrist. Stay with me. They ran. Down corridors lit by fire and magic, past fallen guards and shattered stone. They're heading for the nursery. Elara shouted. Vaylor's grip tightened. They won't reach it. But when they burst into the royal nursery, it was already too late. Two elders stood there. Teacher YSS. And Morkant. The infant's cradle was overturned. Elara's blood ran cold. Vaylor roared, a sound so powerful the walls cracked. Teacher YSS sneered. You defy blood law, King Nightborn. Morkant raised a ritual blade. And now you pay. Elara moved without thinking. She stepped between Vaylor and the cradle. Stop, she said. Teacher YSS laughed. You think yourself important? Elara felt something stir deep in her chest. Something warm, ancient, familiar. I know I am, she said quietly. The air shifted. The sigils on the nursery walls began to glow. Vaylor stared at her. Elara. Her heart pounded as memories flooded her. Her father's notes, the diagrams she never fully understood, the symbols that felt right when she touched them. She raised her hand. And the ancient language spilled from her lips. Not learned. Remembered. The elders froze. Tirwes's face drained of color. Impossible. Vaylor's eyes widened. Elara, he whispered. What are you? Her voice trembled as the truth surfaced. My father wasn't just a healer. The symbols flared brighter. He was a keeper. The room shook. Morkant stumbled back. That bloodline was erased. Elara's eyes burned with light. You failed. A force surged outward, knocking the elders to their knees. Vaylor stared at her, not with fear but awe. The truth slammed into place. Elara wasn't just a girl who saved his son. She was the key to what the court had tried to destroy. The prophecy they feared. The bridge between worlds. The guardian fate itself had chosen. Vaylor stepped beside her, voice ringing with power. Leave. Now. Teacher YSS glared. You choose her over us? Vaylor didn't hesitate. I choose my son's future. With a final glare, the elders vanished into shadow. The nursery fell silent. Elara collapsed. Vaylor caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her into his arms. Her head rested against his chest, heart racing. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. Vaylor held her like something precious. Neither did I. He looked down at her, centuries of cold certainty shattered. You are no longer just under my protection, he said softly. You are bound to me. Elara looked up, breathless. What does that mean? Vaylor's thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. It means the court will never stop. Her lips trembled. And you? Vaylor's gaze softened, dangerously. Neither will I. In that moment, Elara understood. The war had begun. And she was no longer just surviving it. She was standing at the vampire king's side. The palace did not recover from that night. By morning, rumors moved faster than blood magic. Whispers slipping through servant corridors, leaping across noble balconies, crawling into the darkest corners of the blood court. The elders had tried to kill the king's chosen guardian. And failed. Elara awoke in Vaylor's chambers, sunlight filtered through enchanted glass that softened the dawn. Her body ached, her head heavy, but her heart felt painfully alive. She sat up too quickly. You should rest. Vaylor's voice came from nearby. He stood by the window watching the city below. No crown. No armor. Just the weight of a kingdom resting on his shoulders. Elara touched her chest. The nursery, the baby. He's safe, Vaylor said immediately. Stronger than before. Relief crashed through her so hard her eyes burned. Vaylor turned to face her. What you did last night awakened ancient protections. The palace itself recognized you. Elara shook her head faintly. I didn't mean to. I know, Vaylor said softly. That's why it matters. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been clawing at her since she woke. What am I? Vaylor approached slowly as if not wanting to startle her. You are Alara Vale, daughter of Alden Vale, last living keeper of the resonant blood. The words felt unreal. My father never told me. Vaylor sat beside her, close but not touching, because telling you would have marked you for death. The keepers weren't warriors. They were bridges, healers, guardians of balance. Alara's hands trembled. Balance between humans and vampires. Vaylor nodded. The court erased them because balance threatens supremacy. Alara swallowed. Then they'll never accept me. No, Vaylor agreed. They won't. Silence stretched between them. Then Alara whispered, and you? Vaylor met her gaze. I already have. Her breath caught. Vaylor continued, voice steady but stripped of distance. I built my rule on fear. On obedience. On blood law that crushed anything fragile. Alara listened, heart aching. I told myself it was necessary, Vaylor said. That strength required sacrifice. But last night when I saw them raise blades against you, against the woman who saved my son, I realized something. He paused. I have been ruling a realm that does not deserve to survive as it is. Alara's eyes widened. Vaylor, that's dangerous. Yes, he said simply. So is change. The summons was issued at noon. Not a secret council. A public assembly. Every noble house. Every blood court official. Every ranking guard and advisor. And Alara walked beside the vampire king. Not behind him. Not beneath him. Beside him. Gasps rippled through the grand hall as they entered. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting a moment no one would ever forget. Tichos was absent. Morkan stood pale and rigid, surrounded by allies who suddenly looked uncertain. Vaylor ascended the dais, Alara at his side. My people, Vaylor said, his voice carrying without effort. Last night, there was an attempt on my son's life. Outrage erupted. Vaylor raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. The attempt came not from rebels, he continued, but from within this court. Murmurs turned sharp. Alara Vale saved my heir, Vaylor said. And for that she was marked for death. Morkan stepped forward, desperate. Your Majesty, she is a destabilizing force. Vaylor turned on him, eyes blazing. She is a healer. He gestured to Alara. She carries knowledge this realm tried to bury. Knowledge that saved the future you claim to protect. The hall shook with whispers. Vaylor's voice hardened. I am ending the purge laws. The room exploded. What? Impossible. Blood law. Vaylor roared once, raw, commanding, ancient. Silence slammed down. I am the law, he said. He looked at Alara then, not as a ruler addressing a subject, but as a man addressing the one person who had changed him. Alara Vale, Vaylor said, voice resonant. By ancient right, I name you blood-bound guardian to my son. A sigil flared beneath her feet, warm and bright. And by my will, he continued, I name you my equal in council. The court reeled. Morkan fell to his knees. You would elevate a human. Vaylor's voice was merciless. I would elevate truth. He turned back to the assembly. Any who oppose this will step forward now. No one moved. Fear had ruled them for centuries. But something else ruled the room now. Hope. Vaylor extended his hand toward Alara. She hesitated only a second, then took it. The bond flared between them, not magic, not domination, but recognition. A gasp rippled through the hall as the sigil changed. No longer guardian. Something deeper. Something older. Vaylor felt it too. His breath caught. Alara, he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes shining. I'm still human. Vaylor's thumb brushed her knuckles. You are everything this realm forgot how to be. The truth settled between them like a vow. Their bond was no longer just fate. It was choice. That night, the city celebrated quietly. Not with blood rituals. With light. Candles in windows. Music in lower quarters. Humans and vampires standing closer than they ever had before. Alara stood on the balcony watching it all. I never wanted a throne, she said softly. Vaylor stepped behind her, careful, respectful. You don't sit on one. She turned. Then what are we? Vaylor met her gaze, centuries of loneliness finally giving way. Partners. Guardians. Something new. Alara smiled faintly. They'll hate me for changing things. Vaylor smiled back, slow, dangerous, sincere. They already do. He reached out, stopping just short of touching her cheek. May I? She nodded. His touch was gentle, reverent, not a king claiming, a man asking. Ilara leaned into him, heart steady for the first time in her life. Somewhere inside the palace, a child laughed, strong and alive. And in that sound, the realm felt its future shift. Not ruled by fear, but guarded by compassion. Not led by purity, but strengthened by balance. The poor girl they tried to erase had become the reason a kingdom survived. And the vampire king who once ruled through cold silence had learned to bow, not in weakness, but in love.